Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to a brand new episode of What If Deku Awakens Adrenaline. Izuku fought like hell at the games against Todoroki. What if he fought even harder? What if he learned of something new within his quirk that empowered him through pain and helped him shape a new style of fighting, of life and of thinking about heroics? One of his own, one that he could control, one that he could wield and shape to its full potential. If you guys enjoyed this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel. After watching this video, don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description down below. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. That hurts. Yeah, metal tends to have that effect on skin. Grimacing at the snarky tone in Mei's tone, Izuku turned away in both a huff and a wince as the steel protrusions that jutted out of the skeleton that the girl was working on and deep into his flesh. Clenching his other hand and biting his bottom lip with such intensity and strength that he was worried that it might draw blood, the green-haired teen just sat there as the girl before him just continued to work on the mechanism that wound its way down his arm. The soft tinkering of Mei's screwdriver filled the air alongside Izuku's constant shuffling and harsh intakes of air that had grown very common in the last half an hour. Don't worry hotshot, I'm almost done. Also, I recall you asking for this to be made, so don't complain, Kay? Glancing up to meet her amber orbs, the pair of eyes zooming in on his pain with their crosshairs making the Quirk inheritor feel like he was in some sort of standoff, Izuku could clearly see the snark and glee in being proven right. Before she had even begun to put the skeleton onto his body, she had marveled at how much pain he would be going through to even put this thing on. Foolishly, he said that he could take it, which resulted in Izuku's current feeling of stupidity. Yeah, I know. This routine continued for a few minutes, with Izuku starting to tap his left hand on his legs to pull out a sense of mundanity that would dull the pain in his system to make it at least manageable. It didn't work. Then, the miraculous moment came when Mei ceased her movement and took a step back away from him, her finger on her lips as she continued to stare into his very soul/th calculating gaze. He waited for a command. Move your arm, see how it feels. Complying, Izuku took his right arm off the table that he had placed it on all those minutes ago, and immediately felt both the new weight of the metal on his body as well as the kinks and annoyances that he had to stretch out of his arms and joints as a result of being in his stationary position for so long. Clenching both of his fists, he leaned back alongside Mei, who he could see in the corner of his gaze leaning forward towards his body, and took in the appearance of his second skeleton. It was a strange gold color on the rack that shone with pride and glory, but now that it was stained with both blood and oil that it looked like copper, Izuku was happy that his inventor friend had picked a silver frame for him to work with, against the pale light of his flesh. The silver stood out greatly, and it would stand out even better against his costume. Alongside this, the appendage ended at his shoulder, staining his skin with its presence all the way on his right limb, acting as both a reminder that this would need to cover his entire torso when finished and at the fact that he had no shirt on, Mei having insisted that he take it off as to not damage his shirt, then having made several jokes at the expense of his nakedness. Apart from this, it looked almost exactly like the one of the rack, a long, bendable stretch of metal that snaked its way down his arm, with a second cylindrical strip following up his arm for support, until it reached his hand where I split off into 5 separate wires for each finger and ending at the second joint in each finger, first in the case of the thumb, while sharp spikes poked out from the bottom of each wire and dug deep into his skin, separated by about 20 centimeters before they hit again, creating a ring of blood around some parts of his arm. He had thrown away his bandages long ago, not seeing a need in them. However, one thing stood out about the mechanism that looked new to Izuku, and that was a hook that swung around the palm of his hand and connected on the opposite side, creating a handle that he could grab on comfortably without much damage. Why was it there? No idea. Cautiously, he slipped his grasp down his forearm, feeling a sense of fulfillment when the cool material hit his receptors and caused a chill to spread throughout his frame. Then, he reached his trek to his fingers, the metal stricture crisscrossing over a few of his malformations that existed within his skin before he slipped his metal-free hand into the embrace of his infused hand and clicked the digits that begged for release. And he felt it. Hard. The click caused the spikes to push a few cms deeper because of him bending, and that left Izuku at their mercy, causing him to cry out and for his eyes to shoot open as he felt a small dose of adrenaline kick in, boosting his healing around the holes in his flesh. During that, he saw Mei flinch, then tried to move forward, but he just threw his hand up to stop her. After a while, it calmed down and the spikes were securely in his skin, with the skin having been healed around them. Izuku chuckled. Going to hurt to take them out. Yep, it will, but hey, it's not like anyone warned you or anything. The pink-haired girl reminded him, smirking a fierce smile at him while an underlying tone of concern flittered around her eyes. Despite his anguish, Izuku somehow managed to shoot her a similar smile back. Then the issue of this new handle arose within Izuku's mind. Hey Mei, what's this thing for? Raising his hand once again, slowly this time, he gestured to the handle that wrapped across his right hand with an inquisitive gaze in his eyes. To this, Mei tapped the screwdriver held within her grasp against the side of her head a few times as her face scrunched up in a manner that the green-haired boy could only describe as cute, which made his face flush slightly at the thought, while she continued to ponder on the device's intention. Then, her eyes seemed to shine as she pointed her screwdriver forward. Oh, that thing? Yeah, I know what that's for. Walking forward with a spring in her step and a small swivel in her hips, Izuku just held his hand out dumbly as the pink-haired beauty took his hand into her own, more accurately her two hands, leaving the Quirk inheritor practically inept for the remaining few minutes as she held onto his digits. Now this is a fancy little thing that I came up with to help the whole pain train idea that you have, so you should be thanking me. Looking down, she stole a glance from his flustered gaze and her face seemed to light up as her fingers began to slow on his palm, drawing circles and swirls onto his exposed skin. The green-haired teen guessed that this was an attempt to both entertain herself and make him feel awkward, and that thought only got out after he had stopped focusing on his flush features because of the person before him. I'm going to take your awkward mumbling as a thank you, Mei, for being the best inventor in the world and for gifting me this incredible thing that will help me completely obliterate my body. You know, when I say it like that, this sort of seems like a bad thing. Once again, that same snarky grin crossed her face as Izuku decided that the floor was quite interesting in the current moment. However, he was spared from any more trouble when Mei began to chuckle lightly. Now what does this handle do, you may ask? Well, this handle controls how far the spikes dig into your skin. Leaning down, she cupped the handle lightly before pushing it back towards his palm, and almost immediately Izuku could feel the pain that constantly shot into his arm begin to vanish. That was when he decided to look down and bear witness to the spikes begin to retract upward, coiling in on themselves so they could simply exist without always causing some sort of pain. To some, it might seem small. To Izuku, this was a big deal. Wow, Mei, I never thought about that sort of thing before. Yeah? Well, I thought that you wouldn't want 2 centimeters long pieces of steel entering your body at all times. Only at certain times. One thing I have to tell you though is to not pull too hard on the handle. You know, not too hard away from your palm, I mean. He looked at her with a confused gaze. Sigh, let me just show you. Prepare for some more pain, by the way. Wait, what? Wrapping one of her small, dainty hands around the handle, she pulled it back towards herself, and in an instant, Izuku could feel the spikes shoot back out into his flesh once more. As a sort of recoil effect, his left hand began to clench and curl in on itself while his teeth began to gnaw on his tongue once more. All the while, Mei just had this look of guilt and annoyance at herself the whole time as she pulled onto the handle. I'm sorry about this, Izuku, I really am. But I'm a show no tell kind of girl, you know? Yeah, I understand, don't worry about it. After a while, the pink-haired student reset the mechanism so that the green-haired boy didn't have the spines digging into his body, causing a few streams of crimson to trickle off his arm and drip to the floor below. Cautiously, Mei took a few steps back to examine the state of both the boy and the machine before her as Izuku continued to huff and moan at the release of his pain. Well, thank you, Mei, this will really give me a sec, need to adjust something. And just like that, the engineer strolled over to him and began to position his arm so it was stuck straight horizontally before taking a seat on the only place available, Izuku's lap. Placing her body down onto him, she seemed perfectly content to just continue working on the mechanism, offering not so much as a slight hum of knowledge at what she was doing to the Quirk inheritor, and how his body had effectively shut down in a sea of red. He felt so flustered, so speechless, so warm. Her body pressed against him seemed to just make him feel warm, feel like she was there for him. It may just be a simple embrace, but to someone like Izuku, who had often been cited as being a social outcast as a response to not only his quirklessness but also his social ineptness, and list of strange and wonderful traits just made it so that any sort of positive interaction with people made the boy feel warm and happy inside. To be honest, he hadn't experienced much physical affection either, so this was new for him. However, that sentiment didn't really help him and his raging hormones at this current moment. Thrown into a cluster of stumbling and spitting out what very few words that he could muster, Izuku just stared wide-eyed at the girl who was completely ignoring his presence, and instead continued to work on the mechanism like he wasn't even there. And she stayed that way for some time, before. You know, this seat is actually really comfortable. I might try finding one for my home, you know? Hee, don't worry, I'm just messing with you. I'll be a few more moments hotshot, so just keep your hormones under control for a little bit longer. And even now, after she had personally acknowledged it, he still couldn't help but hone in on this very basic fact that she was sitting close. No, sitting on him. Personally, it seemed like something from a badly written web story or a crappy rom-com, but he still couldn't help but acknowledge it. He had no shirt on after all, so he could feel every curve of her back pressing against him, with only the thin veil of her tank top stopping the two pieces of flesh from connecting. And from this position and his profound height above the girl, he had a very clear view of her front as well, something that seemed almost like a blessing and a curse at the same time. In the end, everything was designed just to make Izuku feel nervous and jittery, and done. Hopping up from her perch with a spring in her step, May turned on her heels to look at the boy with a sense of mischief and a sense of curiosity in her amber orbs. So, how's it feel? I tightened the coils in the upper layer of the arms so that you would have more traction, and so it would feel less weighted and you can move around easier. Pretty neat, huh? He just nodded, face still flushed while his eyes were trailed onto his silver skeleton. Cautiously, he began to lift his arm and felt that the weight that was previously affecting his limbs had been lifted slightly, allowing his arm more movement and freedom. Glancing back up to meet May's calculating gaze, he offered her a small smile. Yeah, it feels way better now. Thank you. To this, he received a similarly kind smile and the slightly flushed cheeks of one pink-haired girl. Well, that's alright. Allowed me to test out some new tech and it helped you out with your powers, so it worked out for the both of us. Now then, class is gonna start soon, so you should get your muscles back in their shirt, don't you think? Not that I mind, of course. Just some people can get so jealous these days. The snark and intent to cause him embarrassment was clearly there, yet Izuku still fell for it despite her smirk and the alluring expression present in her eyes that clearly gave her intentions away. Nevertheless, he complied to her commands, shying away from her peering and giggling figure as he went. He removed the mechanism now attached to his arm, attempted to remove the mechanism now attached to his arm. What it actually resulted in was Izuku getting the mechanism off his arm, but no, without it catching his skin and making his moan and grumble as the metal pricked him, while May just continued to giggle at him. Ignoring her noise, the green-haired teen took a look upon his arm, complete with the few, still wet, drops of blood that had been secreted from his cuts, and all he could do was sigh. Guess I'll have to get used to this sight as well then. He was meant to say it quietly, but apparently, he wasn't quiet enough, as May just suddenly stopped moving and started to look upon his form as though he had a second head, which wasn't too uncommon in this day of age. Just from that quick glance, he could see the panic and the confusion in her yellow eyes, the color of sunshine burning deep into his core as he suddenly felt a wave of emotions drown him in their embrace. Sorry, don't worry about it, Izuku. Just remember that you don't have to shoulder everything just cause your body can take a little bit more now, okay? As she spoke, May began to walk over to him, all the while keeping his gaze as she walked. No swagger, no sass, no snark, just genuine care. And it stayed that way, their eyes locked together as she expressed her desires for his powers, for a while until Izuku began to feel a certain warmth around his hand. Quietly breaking her gaze, he looked down to see the pink-haired girl running her gentle and small hands over the cuts and scars of his hand, which also resulted in her getting some of his blood on her fingers. Not that she really minded. If Izuku was being honest, that bit also felt really nice. Comforting, warm, painful. What was that for? Turns out, during the time when she had taken him into her hands, she had decided that she needed to flick his just-healed arm too. Well, to be honest, he didn't know why, but she had done it, and it had hurt. Just testing a theory, hotshot, calm down. Now I don't know if nurse lady, recovery girl, told you this, but it looks like your skin becomes very sensitive after healing, so don't get anyone to touch it during that time or it'll hurt like a bitch. And that goes for your suit as well, cause that will hurt even more. In fact, it will hurt like a motherfucker. Chuckling at her as she performed some eccentric hand movements in front of his face, Izuku could only smile. And when did you become a doctor? She smirked. When you asked? Hotshot. He shuddered. When did I ask you that? Don't worry about it, you didn't. Then why? However, one final thing. You mentioned that you didn't know when your thingamajig activated? Well, if we're using this limb as an example, it appears that it activates when the injury or pain inflicted upon yourself would leave a normal person crippled, so, hope that helps, I guess. She just shrugged nonchalantly despite giving out quite grave information that made Izuku actually shudder. Thanks, I guess. Welp, you better get going or else you're going to be pretty late for class. What have you got last period actually? Watching as the teen stood up from his desk and go to retrieve his shirt, that she may or may not have tried to hide, May began to question the boy. Hero training, I believe. Slipping on his shirt and securing it with the buttons, he went to go grab his tie, but somehow May got there first. Let me. Without another word, the short girl flipped up his collar and swung the tie around his neck before beginning to tie it. For Izuku, this was the third time in like 10 minutes that the girl had been this close to him, and he didn't exactly hate it. Sure, he felt flustered and hot, but nothing that he hated per se. He did note that May was using the time taken to tie his tie as a means to touch his body though, which he once again didn't really hate. It was all just sort of overwhelming. Finally though, she finished, ending off her services with a little tap on his chest and a smile. All done! Now then, stop staring and go to class. Giggling, she pushed the boy backwards and towards his bag while she spun on her heels and started to saunter away, a sway in his hips and the same swagger, sass and snark radiating off her form as she went. Shaking his head, Izuku retrieved his bag and began to walk out, but not before requesting one more thing. Hey May, can I come back tomorrow? I have a few new costume ideas that I want to run by. Popping her head back from the mech that she had begun working on, she gave him a sincere smile to finish his leave. Yeah, sure Izuku, see ya tomorrow. Wait a sec dash. For a second, she vanished, before emerging back from her machine to fling the mechanical skeleton that they had been working on at the teen, who fumbled and flailed around when presented with the machine. Looking confused at the device for a short time, Izuku soon realized that she must have picked it up when she was looking over him a few minutes ago. Catch? Showing Izuku another smile, she started to wave him off and out of the workshop. What? I gave you your scar suit, so go on, beat it. I gotta tend to my babies and currently you're taking all of my attention away from them. Shaking his head in her twist and attitude, the green-haired boy began to leave. Okay then, bye May. See ya, hotshot. As the heavy doors of the workshop closed before her, May felt herself let out a fierce sigh as her face and body flushed red. Working with Izuku was strange. He had been awkward and had fumbled over everything while she had worked on him, but he was also really brave to even have the idea to go through with this sort of thing. Brave or stupid, that is. Trailing a finger across the side of her massive mecha, the pink-haired girl retired to the seat that said boy had been sitting in mere minutes ago. Just sitting there, she could feel the few drops of blood that had spilt onto the seat and the floor below her, and there was just enough to incite worry but not cause a panic. Was he really ready for this? Or had this new power set of his quirk messed with his mind enough where he thought that he would be able to constantly handle this sort of pain? To be honest, she didn't know, and she knew for a fact that she wouldn't be getting more answers until tomorrow. Leaning back against the steel frame of the chair, May began to examine and look over her hand, a few drops of the green-haired self-destroyer's blood having dried on her fingers and knuckles. Running her dainty fingers over the skin, she sighed once again. I hope you know what you're doing, Izuku, I really do. Ring ring. Panting heavily as he reached the door of the changing rooms, Izuku started to slowly use the wall as support while he made his way towards the door. He had started walking from May's workshop a few minutes ago, only to hear the warning bell cast a deafening shadow over the school, which had forced him to begin running due to the changing rooms being on the opposite side of the school from the workplace. So, he had to run. Aside from looking pretty stupid from just running around sets of students to get to class, Izuku noted that quite a few people were looking at him weirdly. It might have been because of the fact that he was running, but he had noticed the stares from before he even started. Groups of people that began to bore into his very being when he walked by, ceasing any kind of conversation they previously were involved in to instead whisper in quiet, illegible tones. Some held curiosity in their gaze, others held some form of spite and jealousy, and some just looked strangely attracted to his figure as he sped down the corridor, but that might have just been his imagination. Either way, it sort of creeped him out if he was being completely honest. Finally, he was broken out of his mind-filled haze as he made it to the door and watched tiredly as it swung open and into the male changing room. Even from outside the room, noise just exploded all over his stagnant and frozen form, from the hushed murmurs of the girls on the other side of the wall to the loud cursing of Bakugo to the disciplinary shouts of Ida and what seemed to be Mineta as he tried to do. Well, it was something to do with the girls, that was for sure. In response, Izuku couldn't help but sigh. Seemed like just a normal day at Yui. Making his way into the changing room, he tried to divert as much attention away from himself as possible, focusing on making it in time for practice while also catching back his breath. Once again, luck wasn't on his side. "Izuku, where have you been? You're usually one of the first ones here." The eccentric and over-the-top voice of Ida spoke out behind his as he began to take off his top for the second time that day. Twisting his head, he just saw the speedster standing behind him with a quizzical gaze in his eyes. Throwing his tie to the bench, he relented. "Just working on some stuff, Ida. Nothing really to worry about." "If you are sure, my friend." Chuckling slightly at his friend's nature, Izuku returned to dressing himself in his hero attire. However, as he was about to put it on, he paused. Glancing down at it, he couldn't help but feel embarrassed by it. The protrusions at the top of the hood that were supposed to look like All Might's hair looked dopey and stupid to the point where they had been mistaken for bunny ears more than a few times. The crappy mask that had a tacky and fake smile painted onto it looked like some sort of cosplay rather than anything productive. The out-of-place padding and cartoon mascot-like gloves just seemed off-putting and tacky. That's the word to describe his costume perfectly, actually, tacky. Holding it in his hands, Izuku began to smooth over some of the creases with his fingers, and as the scarred pieces of flesh came into view, his eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, this was the power of All Might, of All for One, but now his new thing had activated and he was drifting ever further away from All Might, and to be honest, that was okay. If he was going to be the best hero that he could, he needed to be unique and needed to differentiate himself from someone like All Might, yet his costume didn't speak this. Instead, it spoke of a mere imitator of the actual thing, of a faker trying to be All Might with cheap tricks and plastic. All of these thoughts got ideas plaguing Izuku's mind, ideas of whether or not he could be the new symbol of peace after All Might, if this was really meant to be, or in actuality he was meant for something different. Hell, his new powers seemed to dictate that. After all, who would want to look up to someone that needed to cause harm to themselves in order to save the day? No. Izuku? Breaking out of his trance-like state once more, the green-haired boy soon realized that he was outside in the cityscape area that they had used in the first training session as well as the entrance exams. Looking down, he noticed that he had dressed himself in his costume and was fully clothed before glancing over to his right to see Uraraka, also in her costume, looking at him anxiously. "HM? What's wrong?" "Nothing, you were just sort of spacing out is all." Shrugging her shoulders, the shorter girl swiveled on her heels and backed towards the front where All Might and Aizawa were situated. All around him, Izuku could tell that his other classmates were also waiting for one of the two people at the front to begin talking and give them some insight on what they were doing. Glancing down, the green-haired boy noticed the metallic scarsuit gripped between his right and left hand, hidden from the sight of those around him. Gripping onto it, he felt one of the grips cut through the cloth of his gloves and cause a wave of crimson to begin poking out from his skin. Yet he didn't do anything to cover it, he just let it grow and expand until a large drop fell from grace and hit the earth with an audible splash. Still, he kept his eyes forward, even when Uraraka turned to him in confusion. "If we could have your attention, please." Refocusing in on their teacher, Izuku and the rest of his class let their eyes rest on the form of Eraserhead and All Might. "Today we have a test for you, one like the test that you took part in during one of the first days at the academy. A classic heroes versus villains fight." Aizawa somehow managed to get that out before he was interrupted by the much more demanding All Might. "Young students, today you will be performing exercises in groups consisting of heroes and villains, much like your first hero lesson." "I just said that." "This time, however, instead of going after a device, you will be using your quirks to rescue a hostage who will also be one of your classmates." Shooting his eyes around the collection of students, he saw a few of them at a loss of what to do, especially Bakugo, who seemed quite disappointed at being a savior hero for a change. "Now we will choose who will be paired up as heroes, as villains, and who will be acting as the hostage. For a few minutes, Izuku just stood in silence, letting the world around him suck his whole form into itself as noise and shuffling of other students caught his eyes and ears in distraction, which he was actually pretty happy of. After a while, Aizawa and All Might had picked out the selection. Alright, Team A will be Bakugo and Tsuyu as the heroes versus Kaminari and Kuda as the villains with Mineta as the hostage. Standing still to observe the emotions that were flowing around the room, Izuku witnessed the harsh clicking of Bakugo's tongue as he strolled off with a depressed-looking Tsuyu following behind him as Kaminari just shrugged and wandered over to his partner who actually looked sort of happy to be with someone like Kaminari, and Mineta just looked white. Chuckling, Izuku turned around to walk back into the waiting room until a large hand slapped itself down onto his shoulder. Swiveling his head, he saw the ever-smiling face of his mentor. Young Midoriya! Hey All Might! Listen, are you sure that you're able to take part and fight? You with your whole new top seeker thing? Yeah, I'll be fine. Thank you for the concern though. No worries. It's what I do. Strolling back down and towards the hall with All Might at his side, he waited a while before he saw the giant's head turn down to look upon his arms, which was where his mechanical skeleton was being held. Turning back, Izuku could tell that the man had questions about it. Sighing, the teen relented. It's just some experimental tech that I was working on at lunch. It should help me with achieving adrenaline activation and allow me to use its powers without the random chance that it had before, when I didn't know how much damage I had to take before it activated, but with this it's a certainty, making it. Unknowingly, the boy had begun to mumble under his breath, causing Yagi to just stare at him with a thin veil of confusion and acceptance glazing his vision. Okay, young Midoriya, I think I understand. As long as you know what you're doing with it. Returning his successor's smile with his own, the pro hero couldn't help but feel a little cautious at the device Izuku now held. It looked sharp and dangerous, something that could activate his powers while still hurting him. From that, his eyes slipped down to the boy's scarred and injured hand, frowning at the sight. Those scars would be with him forever, etched into his skin as reminder of his first activation for the rest of his life, and he didn't know if that was scary or endearing. Shaking his head, he noticed that the group had reached the observation room. For a short while, it was just the preparation phase, so everyone in the room remained stagnant and anxious, resorting to light chat and conversation to get them through. Izuku stood idly by Yuikaka and Ida as they talked to some others throughout the class like Kirishima and Toru, just allowing them all to talk and dull his senses to the rest of the world. Due to his quirkless nature, he hadn't had much reason to speak in school for fear of being shut down, so he just learned to listen to others and found it to be quite relaxing. Speaking wasn't his best ability, but he enjoyed noise, and other people talking did just that. Releasing a light sigh, he heard everyone around him quieten and shift towards the screens at the front of the room. There, it broadcast the beginning of the match between the two teams, with one screen showing the heroes awkwardly standing around while the other two showed a cowering Mineta and the two villains making small talk with each other. Overall, the atmosphere seemed relatively calm. Then, the siren rang. Suddenly, both teams were thrown into action, with Bakugo rushing forward into the desolate building that they were fighting in while Azuri started to climb the building. It was a smart tactic. Whether it was intentional or not was another story, but flanking the enemy from both sides and grabbing the hostage in the chaos was smart. And to their credit, that's what the heroes did. Bakugo rushed in headfirst and stormed the two unprepared heroes who tried to fight back, but it just ended with the two of them lodged into the wall. While Kaminari was while Kuda just looked down at him in worry, while Azuri grabbed Mineta and left. Heroes 1, Villains 0. Next up was a team consisting of Momo and Todoroki as villains, while Shuji and Siro as heroes with Toru as the hostage. Due to this, the match was a strange cat and mouse where both heroes and villains struggled to figure out where the restrained girl was in order to retrieve or defend her. In the end, the timer beat everyone. Villains win that round. After a while, Izuku gave up counting and let the bright colors and breaking environments take over his vision, while his mind sank into an abyss of nothingness. Different matchups and characteristics of each student that he might be paired with sprang up every once in a while, but apart from that he just let his body relax for a short while. All throughout the day, he had been on edge or too hyped up on his own excitement to step back and relax a small bit. And he did just that. Will be Midoriya and Ishido against Kaminari and Sato with Uraraka as the hostage. Get to your places. In fact, he got so caught up his own mind that he missed out on most of the matches, only tuning in for his own matchup, and even then, he seemed lost in his own world. Shaking his head, he felt a small tug on his sleeves and followed it to find Mina looking at him with a quirked eyebrow. Izuku, you okay, man? Blinking a few times at her question, he shook his head again before responding. Yeah, I'm good, don't worry. The pink-skinned girl smiled. Good. Now come on, move your ass or we'll be too late for the villain beatdown. I've been meaning to teach Kirishima a lesson for a while now. Laughing lightly at her as the two began to walk down the halls and to the arena, Izuku couldn't help but take her in. By every sense of the word, Mina was a strange girl. Appearance-wise, she had pink skin and horns alongside two very strange-looking eyes that, while not too uncommon separately, still looked quite out of place when put together. Personality-wise, her strange dialect and casual nature seemed rather foreign to his laid-back and shy personality. However, that wasn't really a bad thing. Sure, it was new and unusual, but Izuku found her bubbly personality refreshing and new alongside Uraraka's, and her still could appreciate her appearance, and would go so far as to call her pretty or beautiful despite the strangeness that most people focused on. This wasn't something that he should be focusing in on now though. Finally making it to the building, the hero duo found themselves waiting once more in order to prepare. Spinning on her heels, Mina spun round to meet him, having to look up slightly due to the boy being 2 to 3 inches taller than her. So then, Muscles, what cha got for me? We stormed the fort, fly over the top tumbling underneath? Once again, he had to chuckle at her over-the-top personality. However, she did make some valid points. Storming the front of the building could be good. With his power and her unique quirk, they could disrupt Kirishima and saddle long enough to haul Uraraka out of the building. But the two of them have quirks that boost their strength, or at least play into it, so Mina could be put down quite easily. Sneaking around could be good as well, but it could go wrong if they were cornered. Casting his eyes above them, he noted how tall the building was. About 4 stories, he could make that. Judging by the other matches, the hostages and the villains usually held up in the top floor of the complex, so coming in hard from the air could give them valuable time and resources to take them down and get Uraraka out. A surprise attack, a mixture of the two ideas he just had. You're okay with heights, right, Mina? Yeah, I guess. Why'd you ask? Oh, we climbing? Sort of. Stepping back, he looked down at the mechanical limb that he held in his possession. Time to put it on. Grabbing a hold of the right sleeve of his costume, he roughly tugged it down his arm until he heard it rip and the material collapse down towards the concrete. Flexing the limb a few times to make sure that it was alright to be used and had no kinks, briefly caught Mina's face burst into a lilac flurry at the sight of his exposed flesh and how it tensed and flexed, but a sly smirk managed to make it to her face as well. Not that I mind seeing all of that, Izuku, but why have you done that? Answering her question with an action, the green-haired boy hauled the contraption of steel up and towards his free arm before beginning to strap it down to his skin and slip his digits through the handle. Making sure it was secure around himself, the teen took in a deep inhale of air as his body began to shake in harsh anticipation of the sharp pain that was soon to come. Locking eyes with his partner, he gave her a gentle smile. Sorry if this annoys you. If what? Ring. As soon as the harsh sound of the siren rang out through the arena, Izuku bit his tongue before pulling the handle back on the device. Hard. In an instant, the cool barbs of steel injected themselves into his flesh and buried themselves deep, causing a flash flood of pain to shoot through the boy's body. And he did not stop himself from screaming. Oh, fuck! Throwing himself into the steel railings behind him, the teen just began to grunt and curse as he gripped his arm for support, and the adrenaline began to surge around his whole form. Shuddering and shaking with the new flush of power that began to shoot through his veins, he just looked forward with complete resolve while the world pulsated and shook in sharp pitches of red and blue, buildings and shapes shifting into a new color spectrum for a few short moments before ceasing. Beside him, he could hear Mina's worried voice, her frantic movements as she shook him, her concerned look and pleading face right before his eyes, and for a split second, he could see her as a normal girl. Pale skin, light blonde hair and green eyes that wouldn't stand out too much in this quirked world, but to Izuku it reminded him of himself, of how he was so plain and useless before. How he had to embrace his quirk and give it all the attention it deserved. Soon, his labored breathing began to slow, and he managed to look Mina in the eye and hear her worries. Izuku! Izuku! For fuck's sake, man, can you hear me? He smiled. She was worried because she cares, or at least he hoped so. Reaching up, the boy pushed his hand up to her exposed shoulder, touching the skin with care and a gentle nature as to not inflict any damage upon her. "Hey, I'm good. Don't worry about." Gritting his teeth as he began to stand once more, he could still see the look of worry etched into the face of the teen before him, her eyes wide at her mouth agape. What the hell was? No time now. You still alright with going up?" Stopping her questioning, he got a slow nod back. "Good." Smashing his right digits together into a fist, he felt the intensity of the skin and its heat as lightning and sparks of red crackled and shot off around him. Then, in an instant, he shot forward, the feeling of cracking in his ankles still prevalent, before winding his arms around Mina so that he was carrying her. It happened so quickly that the girl couldn't really comprehend what was going on, with her face stained lilac and her eyes and mouth wide once more before Izuku just looked down at her and smiled. "Don't worry, I've got you." And she believed him. Jumping lightly on the spot to gain some momentum, Izuku then shot off, the sound of mending in his bones stopping for another round of cracking. The duo soared through the air with blinding speed, constantly being barraged by Izuku's sparks of crimson that marked the air with their crackling. Tightening his grip on Mina's body, Izuku began to see ordinate where he was going to land and how much force he would have to exert in order to break through the concrete ceiling. Sucking in his teeth, he made a quick, split-second decision and rolled when he hit the floor. Wrapping Mina tight into himself as he did in order not to hurt her, the green-haired teen winced as his landing caused a multitude of cracks and sharp edges to emerge all over the building, with the small crevasse slowly catching up to his moving form. Finally, as he finished he let go of the pink-haired girl, and soon the two were standing upright, facing one another. Glancing around, Izuku noticed that the two of them had passed a window on the way up here, and from the previous recordings, that the hostages were usually kept near it or in a separate room away from the villains. As he began to speak up, he caught eyes with Mina only to see her cheeks a deep lilac. Quirking an eyebrow, he began to quietly talk to her as to not alert the others below. "What's up, HM? "Oh, nothing, don't worry about it." She gave him a wide, convincing grin, but that didn't stop the purple on her cheeks. Izuku just sort of shrugged it off though. "If you say so, just tell me if anything is okay?" She smiled a small smile that showed her gratitude. "Good. Now I think I have an idea. I'll enter from here, drop down right on top of them while you sneak around using the top window that we passed over there to get down and find Uraraka. If you need some advice, I'd say use hydrochloric acid to melt away the wall for climbing, but make sure to only do it a few feet, cause with your level of strength with acids, it would corrode right into the room if you left it long enough." Once again, he had begun to ramble, and Mina saw this as her opportunity as to get back at him for making her feel embarrassed, even though she really wasn't. "HM, been taking notes on me, have you, Izuku?" And she got the exact reaction she wanted. His face began to burn and heat up as his eyes went wide, and he stopped his ramblings of the plan to instead just mutter incoherently. I can explain." "Yeah? Well, do it later, muscles, cause we have to go through this amazing plan of yours." Sticking her tongue at him, she started to walk towards the massive crack on the floor and towards the edge of the building, making sure to put a certain swing in her hips as she went. As she did so, she smirked, considering the fact that she knew what she was doing to the poor boy without even looking at him. When she finally made it, she spun on her heels and looked Izuku in the eye, who had moved to the other side of the roof and where he was making preparations to break in. Not break eye contact, she began to walk backwards while saluting him. "Be vigilant, be swift, be strong." That was what she left Izuku with before plummeting off the side of the building, screaming as she went down. All the boy could offer in return was a pitiful shake of the head as he cracked and reset his knuckles before charging them full of all for one and smashing them down onto the concrete below him, causing the figments and fractures to come apart at his feet and fly around his form as he began to fall into the dimly lit room below. Izuku didn't have to wait long until he hit the surface. Rolling again into a crouched position, he quickly surveyed the room with a calculating eye. From his first impressions, it looked as though Kurashima and Sato were focused on the window where Mina had just fell, probably attracted there by her screaming, and so had not yet turned around to face him. Just beside them, Uraraka lay wrapped in some sort of thick metal cable, much stronger than average rope that they usually used to tie up fake hostages. That was when Izuku realized that this situation was entirely revolved around his and Mina's quirks. His strength could simply rip the wires off, but that could lead to some difficulties if there was anything inside, whereas Mina's acid could simply burn through it, and even that could lead to some problems if she wasn't careful enough. Taking advantage of his classmates' dazed phases, Izuku struck. Blasting forward, he stopped just before Sato's body and performed a jump that propelled him over the larger male, landing roughly on his head before performing a spinning twirl in the air that resulted in him being eye-to-eye with the confused boy. Once again, he used this, spinning around until he could kick Sato straight in the face with his foot that wasn't powered up by One for All, resulting in the Sugar Quirk user flying towards the nearest wall but no serious damage. Landing, he saw that Kirishima had begun to turn around and had activated his hardening quirk, so Izuku resorted to just bolting forward and smashing his fist into the back of Kirishima's head, sending the boy sprawling to the floor below, and resulting in a multitude of cracks to emerge around his red hair. Once again, Izuku knew that his quirk would protect him. Gritting his teeth, he reset his arms and knuckles as he moved past the fallen foes and towards the window. Catching a glimpse of Uraraka in the reflection, he just saw her stunned and shocked look, which made him chuckle. However, he also caught her wide-eyed expression and sudden shouting a bit too late, as before he knew it, Sato had wrapped his hand around his torso and had thrown him backwards towards the dry wall positioned at the back of the room. Izuku managed to right himself after colliding with the floor painfully once, ending up back in a crouched position and his foot touching said wall. Looking up, he saw Sato rubbing his head while Kirishima was doing the same, spouting out a few words and mumbles before turning around to face him. As they did, the Quirk inheritor stood to full height to match them. Cracking his knuckles, he smirked alongside Kirishima. "Damn Izuku, that was a pretty good punch. I can see why you could take down Todoroki. Thanks." Pushing his hand down, he wrapped it around his mechanism's handle before pulling it, causing a small jolt of pain to push forth into his system. Biting his tongue, he felt that new pain alongside the pain from hitting both people before him and his rolling fiasco a few seconds ago flood his system and cause a bright array of crimson sparks to come flying off his form, blinding the area around him in a scarlet light. Ignoring the stunned views of both of his opponents, his eyes instead drifted to Uraraka, who, while also holding a large amount of curiosity and pride in her eyes, also held worry and concern. Glancing down, he could only offer her a sympathetic smile as he saw a small trail of blood begin to fall from the first 2 holes in his arm, trailing down his wrist like a small stream. Shaking that out of his head, he heard another crack as he shot himself forward once more, meeting Kirishima head-on. Smirking at one another once more, the 2 quirk users feed each other's fists with their own, creating a small shockwave to be exerted from their force. Running his knuckles up the red-haired boy's own, he felt the metal of his metallic limbs scrape against his skin like steel on steel, throwing his hand above his head and allowing his to give him a rough shove that sent him flying back a few feet. Centering himself once more, Izuku threw up his left arm in preparation for Sato's own attack, which hit him like a truck and caused him to jump to the right a couple of feet. Holding his footing, he eventually managed to push him back with a shoulder charge, shooting into his chest and sending him backwards, stumbling over his own 2 feet. Grunting, he checked his arm as he heard movement behind him. "Izuku! Hey, why'd you start without me?" Turning his head, his eyes met with Mina's, an unnatural amount of sass and sarcasm in her voice as he gazed down at Kirishima's body while shaking her head. "Mina, Uraraka's wrapped in some thick metal wires. Do you think that you can melt through them?" I think I can, but why don't you just rip them off? They wouldn't have put that there unless they had something inside them that could hurt me or her if I pulled it off, so you're the safer option." "Oh, got it. Cover me then, alright?" Winking at him, she walked over Kirishima's chest, leaving him groaning in pain as she neared Uraraka, giving her a wide, toothy grin. Sighing, Izuku spun on his heels as he heard Sato begin to move from the floor alongside Kirishima. "Hey Sato, you deal with Izuku. I'll get Mina." "Gotcha." Gritting his teeth, Izuku bit his tongue hard in order to spark a small amount of pain from his system before charging his fists with One for All infused with adrenaline as he charged forward towards Sato, who was woefully unprepared for him, and smashed him on the back with a sickening crunch coming from his hands afterwards. However, it worked and Sato was sent careening a few floors down below them, hitting the earth with a thud and a moan. Losing himself in the pain for a brief moment, Izuku quickly heard the shuffling of Kirishima as he stood and started towards Mina, the girl complaining and making jokes at his expense as he neared. Spinning on his heels, he dashed towards the man before calling out to the acid user. "Mina! Acid on the floor below him! You got it, muscles! Muscles!" Ignoring Uraraka's flustered call, Izuku watched as Kirishima clipped on a wave of thick turquoise liquid, falling forward before Izuku got there. Channeling his power once more, he moved in front of Kirishima and roared as he caught both of his fists under the hardening user's chin, sending him sky high and through the roof as a result. Huffing and taking in deep breaths, he could hear the brief lapse of silence that the two girls behind him had. Holy shit! Cracking his knuckles, Izuku then began to hop off several pieces of rubble that scattered the landscape and launched himself towards the hole. Waiting there for a few seconds, he then challenged One for All once again and suddenly caught the red riot in his grasp. For a brief second, all was still. Then, Izuku swung both himself and Kirishima around and launched the hardened boy like a javelin down through the building and towards the ground at phenomenal speeds, resulting in his breaking the foundation and hitting the floor with a thud. Landing on his knees, Izuku hissed in brief pain as it flared up in his legs, but he could already feel adrenaline healing his wounds quickly before fading. The pain was gone. Panting heavily, he pushed the handle back towards his palm and the spikes on his devices retracting, sucking back into the metallic creation as he cradled his hand. Looking over to the side, his sight caught both that of Mina and Uraraka, who had been freed at this point, and they were both staring at him with a mixture of emotions. Sighing, he shuffled backwards until he hit a wall and slumped down. Reaching down, he began to remove the small straps of wires that held the device to his arm, watching as it fell to the concrete with a metallic ping. Running his left hand up and down his arm, he could feel the small holes on his arm and how they were pretty much completely healed, only leaving a layer of dried flesh left in their wake. However, the blood was still there, pooling around his arm and towards his knuckles, dripping onto the floor with soft thuds. Chuckling slightly to himself, he spoke. Well, that was a successful test run. Not removing his eyes from the floor, Izuku didn't move when he heard footsteps coming towards him, or when Uraraka moved down to crouch next to him, or when Mina sat beside him at the wall, or when the gravity quirk user took his bloodied and scarred hand into her own tiny ones, running her dainty fingers over each piece of blood or raised piece of hardened flesh. Only did he look at them both when he felt her fingers grip onto him hard and her voice become shaky. You owe us an explanation, Izuku. Now, thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination.